I'm legend. For decades, mainstream leftism has operated on a strict assumption: the West is inherently racist. We see the tension of this assumption play out every day. There are undeniable, persistent disparities in income and crime rates between racial groups. The left explains these disparities through a purely socioeconomic lens. Their model assumes all groups are exactly equal in capacity, meaning any unequal outcome can only be explained by discrimination. The mainstream right attempts to counter this by blaming culture. They argue that some populations simply adopted different values that determine their success. Both of these worldviews rely on a shared dogma: racial egalitarianism. They both fail because they operate on the false assumption that all human populations are biologically identical. We are going to examine a different root cause. Collective disparities are directly downstream of innate, heritable genetic differences forged by evolutionary adaptation. Because this analysis deals strictly with collective group averages, the existence of exceptional individuals within any given group is mathematically irrelevant to the data. Ignoring biological reality forces a society to misdiagnose its major sociological issues. We need to evaluate and deconstruct these egalitarian arguments on a tier list to see where their logic fails. The first argument we consistently hear is that intelligence is not genetically linked. We are placing this in the NPC tier. Denying the heritability of intelligence requires you to reject basic evolutionary mechanics. Geographically separated human populations faced entirely different environmental pressures and selected for different cognitive and physical traits to survive. We can observe species-level genetic variation easily by looking at canine breeds. This diagram compares two breeds of the exact same species, the Chihuahua and the Border Collie. The sliding UI bars measure their innate intellect and trainability levels, which diverge to massive extremes. Blaming socioeconomic factors or systemic discrimination for the lack of Chihuahuas in working dog roles is an obvious absurdity. If evolutionary adaptation dictates the cognitive capacity of animals, the same biological mechanisms dictate the cognitive and behavioral traits in human populations. The claim that human races are inconsequential because our DNA is 99.9% identical also belongs in the NPC tier. This bar chart visualizes DNA sequence overlap across different species. Quantitative similarities do not equal qualitative differences. Humans share exactly 50% of their genetic sequence with a banana and 90% with a house cat. Gray wolves and domestic dogs share 99.9% of their DNA. They diverged a mere 20 to 30,000 years ago, a timeline significantly shorter than the divergence between some human groups. Despite that 99.9% genetic match, a gray wolf lacks the impulse control of a dog. You do not bring wolves to a dog park. A 0.1% genetic variance is not a rounding error. It is the critical margin that dictates massive, unalterable survival traits. The intragroup variance claim asserts that random genetic variance within a single village is greater than the variance between two different races. We place this in the flaw tier. The mathematical premise is true, but it contains a severe biological flaw. Not all genes are equal in weight. Most random genetic variance is meaningless, while some specific genes dictate a population's survival. This interactive globe tracks specific regional genetic adaptations. Here in West Africa, the Duffy negative mutation grants malaria immunity to nearly 100% of the population. Outsiders without African ancestry possess a 0% incidence of this defense.
Moving to the high altitudes of Tibet, the EPAS1 gene allows 90% of the population to survive comfortably in environments with 40% less oxygen. In East Asia, the ABCC11 gene effectively eliminates sweat odor for up to 95% of the population, an adaptation practically non-existent elsewhere. These single gene mutations scale rapidly. Complex multi-gene traits like intelligence, impulse control, and personality are forged by those same intense regional evolutionary pressures. If singular genes alter physical survival for entire groups, then complex genetic clusters undeniably shape group character and societal cohesion. The phrase, "race is a social construct," goes straight to the abyss here. This is not a logical argument. It is linguistic wordplay used to step-step observable reality. This topological nap illustrates global IQ distribution. showing distinct regional clustering. Despite heavy criticism, IQ remains the most reliable predictor of success in highly complex Western societies. When a society imports demographics whose average cognitive traits heavily conflict with the baseline requirements of that society, friction is inevitable. To avoid this uncomfortable data, critics claim that culture alone explains the disparities. But culture is not randomly assigned or easily swapped out. Culture interacts with a group's genetics and predates modern systems. Culture is the biological footprint of a people. A system that works for one genetically distinct population cannot simply be transplanted to another with the expectation of identical results. Looking at the completed tier list reveals the total collapse of these egalitarian arguments. The expectation that all groups will integrate and perform identically is a delusion. The blank slate ideology survives on the fear of being labeled racist. Human groups are deeply distinct for evolutionary reasons. We adapted over millennia to survive entirely different environmental pressures. The collective disparities we see in modern society are not evidence of systemic malice. They are the mathematically inevitable downstream effects of these rooted biological facts. I am Legend. Thank you for ignoring mainstream dogma, looking at the raw data, and applying first principles. If there are other socio-political arguments you want deconstructed, drop them in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.